And another thing about the hero's journey, not really, I'm pretty sure I got it all out of my system last time, but it made me remember some things that I haven't talked about here yet, and I moved my desk again, and I got a new haircut, and I got a call on that red phone that only rings when Paradox Interactives wants me to do another sponsored video, but I can't keep making random comedy sketches in between these essays, or the algorithm won't be my friend anymore. So I'm here to talk about video games! And other mediums of storytelling. But video games are a big part of it. I also got a second camera, or is it just the first camera that I moved? Later. If you missed my last video, I talked about how 3-act story structure and this self-declared monomyth don't neatly map onto all that many stories, especially when expanded to longer formats like a TV show or a book or a 30-hour video game with multiple endings. No template can tell you the best way to tell your story, and especially when you start considering all possible mediums, it becomes pretty clear how limited a static structure really is. What use are 12 steps if one of them constitutes an entire third of your story's runtime, while another is only 0.1%? Does it even matter if your protagonist refuses the call to adventure? If their protest lasts for all of 30 seconds? Apparently a lot of you think so.
I can't get involved. I've got work to do.
A few minutes later, that boy is negotiating with a smuggler. Hamlet waits so long to confront a confirmed murderer that 4 people die. That's how you refuse a call like a man. The point is, all of this is really granular, and I want to talk about all the cool things you can do with storytelling, not just the stuff that doesn't work. It's easy to get focused on all the details of your world building or specific scenes or character arcs, but sometimes when things aren't quite fitting into place, it can help to take a step back and look at some of the broad decisions you didn't even realize you were making, and ask questions you hadn't thought to ask, like, does this have to be a movie? Stories come in all shapes and flavors. They're reproductions of emotional experiences, and they can be delivered in so many different forms through text, images, music, improvised role-playing, interpretive dance, or even the randomized events of a digital simulation. Possibilities are truly endless, and each medium has its own strengths and limitations. Very few stories fully take advantage of the medium they're being told in, especially with such a heavy focus on adaptations these days, but every now and then I find something that fully utilizes its art form and does something that only a movie or a game or a book or a podcast could do, and it resets the standard for how that medium should be utilized in my mind. This is certainly my perfectionism talking, but I think the medium you use to tell your story should allow for the fullest possible recreation of the experience you're trying to create. Likewise, you should intentionally play to the strengths of your chosen medium and not fight against its weaknesses. For example, if you're making a video game and prioritize realistic graphics in motion capture and a story with a predetermined ending, but you limit player interaction to an occasional button press, that's a movie, and you're David Cage. To write a game like a movie or a book like a TV show is to neglect the potential of everything your story could offer in that format. So today, I want to take a look at what a few of the most common mediums do best, why they could be the right pick for your story, and what it should look like when you adapt an existing story from one medium to another so it's not a pathetic ghost of the masterpiece from which it probably spawned. Neat. By the way, over on patreon.com/doormonster, you can download each of these episodes as they're released, in case you have an unreliable internet connection, or you just want to squirrel it away in your bunker hard drives for after the solar flare hits and we all return to a pre-internet society. There's also a library of bonus content, and you'll be helping me and my team make more of these videos. Special thanks to Paradox for sponsoring this video, and there's also a link in the description for Victoria 3, but more on that later. The clearest way to explain the importance of playing to a medium's strengths is to look at adaptation. Adapting a story from one medium to another is actually the only thing that you're currently allowed to do. If you're working on an original story, stop it. They're banned. But the success and the quality of an adaptation tend to rely on how well the writers understand the core experience of the source material and their ability to use the strengths and limitations of the new medium to recreate it. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy originally existed in a non-visual medium, as a radio play and then as a widely known book. The story, while fairly unique in its own right, is largely held up by the dry, witty delivery of its author, Douglas Adams. It's the reason it became my favorite book, and the way he writes became a major inspiration in my own work, actually. Over the years, it's been adapted into visual mediums a couple of times with mixed results. And not because I think those involved didn't care or didn't try, I think it's just really hard to recreate the experience of reading or hearing those words. A lot of the humor is rooted in expositional side tangents that help flesh out the world or provide more detail, and it works well in literature or radio, but doesn't translate as well into a show or movie without weirdly affecting the pacing. Likewise, some of his jokes that are funny when described fall flat when performed, like finding out that Ford named himself after a car because he thought they were the dominant life form. There's also an irreverence for all the absurdity that gets lost in the act of visualizing those events on screen. Like the Earth being destroyed in the movie inherently holds a lot more emotional weight than it ever does in the book. The same visual language is used to make us feel devastated at Princess Leia's loss in Star Wars, but here it's being used to show a moment that in the book is almost shrugged off so we can move on with the real story. So how do you decide which medium is going to represent your story the best? It depends on what part of that story is most important to you and what you want your audience to feel while consuming it. Let's take a look at some of the most common options. Film and television. We've talked about these a lot already. The main strength of movies, or of any medium really, is in their limitations. Movies are mostly limited to a couple hours. They specialize in tight visual storytelling. They're compact packages and are best used for exploring one simple theme or concept through careful composition and timing. The Secret Life of Walter Mitty is one of my favorite movies, and maybe my favorite example of a movie just being a movie real hard. It's not very well known, but it has such a great example of simple cinematic storytelling with an incredibly clear emotional theme, perfect build-up, and ironically, the best true example of the hero's journey I can think of. Because a lot of the story is happening inside the protagonist's head, or when he's alone, or with people who don't speak English, there's not a lot of dialogue to rely on for exposition. All of his character growth and self-discovery has to be shown without anybody explaining it, so it relies almost entirely on the cinematography, the actor's facial expressions, and these elaborate set pieces that are happening both inside his imagination and in real life. The opening scene of the movie is Walter getting up the courage to send a wink to his crush on eHarmony. There's no dialogue at all. He's the only character in the scene, and yet every thought he's having is perfectly clear. An entire story plays out just in these few minutes with a handful of shots, and it's something that only a movie could do. We see what kind of guy he is through visual cues like his clothing and his apartment and the items and the checkbook he's balancing. We watch him make a new account on this dating website, search for a specific woman by name, and then get nervous about hitting a single button to let her know he's interested in her, only to give up, change his mind, have a small moment of bravery, and then it doesn't pay off anyway. He tries to get what he wants within the system that exists, and it doesn't work. And that becomes the theme for the whole movie. I love how well this scene is done because I've watched people interact with screens in movies so many times now, and it's such a hard thing to put to film because it's not a visually interesting activity. But this movie shows that the tools exist to make this moment an interesting story beat. Again, using nothing but the composition of the shots, the acting, and the timing of the edit. You couldn't do the same thing in a video game or a book. Not exactly. You'd have to use different tools specific to those mediums to convey the same feeling. It's small, intimate stuff like this that film is so good for, even against a grand backdrop. Forrest Gump is about one man's life story told from his perspective, filtering decades of history through this one lens. We are seeing and interpreting things differently than he's explaining them, and the visual storytelling allows for that dissonance without having to explicitly tell us that he's an unreliable narrator. We can just see it. The Greatest Showman is all about the art of bringing joy to people and how that final experience matters more than whatever cheap tricks you employ to pull it off, and it uses all the oldest tricks of the medium to tell that story and make its point stronger. As a branch of film, TV series are like movies, but long. They share a lot of the same advantages, but they become more about spending time with the characters and allowing your audience to settle into the world, and that changes the priorities of your storytelling. Romance stories benefit a lot from being longer because you get to have a more realistic buildup of tension and let the characters get to know each other and fall in love at a believable pace. Bridgerton wouldn't work quite as well crammed into a tight hour and a half because the core priority of that story isn't the vibes or the themes, it's the relationships of the characters, especially that season's protagonists. We need that time to get the most out of that experience. Novels are specifically great at fully pulling your audience into your scene, even better than video or audio, partly because you can't multitask while reading, and partly because you have the full range of sensory information at your disposal. You can talk about smells, textures, sensations, emotions. The possibilities are truly only limited by your imagination and mastery of language. They're also great for showing a character's internal thoughts or multiple perspectives, and for being much looser with pacing, going off on tangents or just outright explaining information that you want the reader to know. I think prose can flat out be the most efficient form of storytelling in some cases. Sure, video can accurately capture a real moment, but a few perfectly selected words can activate every one of your senses and use your own memory and imagination to make it feel like you're somewhere else entirely. A picture is worth 1,000 words may be one of the most poorly aged sentences of all time, especially now that AI exists. Turns out pictures are worth maybe 3 to 5 half-assed descriptions and $10 a month. My favorite use of the English language is when a writer manages to perfectly convey an entire concept in a single sentence. Like when Douglas Adams describes how the giant rectangular ships in Hitchhiker's Guide hung in the sky in much the same way that bricks don't. Or The Book Thief, where nearly every description is this perfectly succinct. One early sentence that stuck in my mind forever is a simple scene setting that says, "The day was gray, the color of Europe." Perfect! Beautiful! I know exactly what that means. You didn't need to pull out an expensive camera and a whole film crew and wait till the fog was just right and then do a bunch of sound design to put that image perfectly in my head. That one sentence told me everything about where we are. I know how it looks, feels, smells, sounds. It's like a code phrase to activate exactly the right sensations in your head. And it's a little subjective. Like, I have a traumatically vivid imagination, so it's very easy for me to get absorbed into the mental imagery. And if I read the wrong thing at the wrong time, like when one of my writers recommended Last One at the Party, it'll fuck me up for an entire year. Not everybody will have the same experience, but when it does work, it's so efficient. An excellent example of a book that could really only be a book is This Is How You Lose the Time War, which is written as a back-and-forth communication between two special agents in an incomprehensibly massive struggle to control all of human history. They're having a butterfly effect fight across time and space, and they leave these notes woven into the fabric of reality, and you're reading what they've decoded from these secret messages. It also might be a sapphic romance. It would be nearly impossible to effectively adapt this story into a movie. Film language just does not possess the tools to create the same experience you get from reading this book. And that's cool. That's what makes it special, in the same way that Walter Mitty or The Greatest Showman are going to fall flat if the events are just described in words, unless you find some creative way to deconstruct what made those things so good in the first place, and then use the tools at your disposal to tell the same story in a new way. While film and novels recreate passive emotional experiences through tightly controlled visuals, sounds, or words, video games work best by making you a part of the story, using your reactions and input as an additional tool to drive and pace the narrative. Video game stories exist on a spectrum of predetermination, from interactive but linear movie-like narratives, essentially a maze you just have to run through, to fully simulated worlds that have no intentional plotline and just allow you to find one for yourself. But even the smallest amount of responsibility for the outcome changes the way everything feels. In something like The Last of Us, no matter what you do, events will still ultimately play out the way the creators intended. You may be guiding a character through their moments of action, but you don't have full control over their wants, desires, or decisions. You're just going along for the ride. The characters still wrench control back from you when it matters, and at that point, why not just take it easy and watch the show instead? Glad you asked. Craig Inevitable 2-hour episode dedicated entirely to Lev's transition is going to be the biggest dumpster fire you've ever seen win an Emmy. But getting back on topic, even if the HBO adaptation had been more faithful to the source material, there would still be aspects of the game that would be challenging to perfectly recreate. As an example, let's take a look at Craig's self-insert.
What does cordyceps do? Is it evil? No. It loves.
Cannibal Dave here is more or less the same creepy guy in both versions of the story, but the way he's introduced in the game is important not just for Ellie, but for the player's experience. In the show, we're first introduced to him delivering a religious sermon in the post-apocalypse, which is clear movie language for a cult that probably eats people. He's weird and suspicious to the audience right away, before he ever even meets Ellie, so when he does, we know exactly why she can't trust him. The game takes a different approach, unique to its toolset. You don't know who this guy is appears when you first see him, just like Ellie, who you're now playing as because Joel suffered a horrific injury and might be dead? We don't know at this point, and we're sharing Ellie's extreme sense of caution. David is just another survivor trying to make his way through this world, and he's untrustworthy the same way anybody else would be. But when a horde of zombies ambushes you and you have to work with him to fight them off, it changes how you feel about him. Not how Ellie feels about him. You. Just the simple setup of not being alone during another scary zombie fight endears you to this NPC who gives you a gun, has your back, and talks you through it while killing a decent share of zombies on his own. So when the other shoe drops and he reveals that he's known who you are this whole time, it's you who feels stupid for letting your guard down. Even after he kidnaps Ellie, each revelation of how bad he truly is feels like another slap in the face because the game introduced him to you as an ally regardless of how much you bought into his character. Even if the scene played out exactly the same way in the show, it would be missing that emotional element of relief followed by betrayal that you get to experience in the interactive version. It's something special that only the video game medium can do. On the other extreme of this predetermination spectrum are games with essentially no story. They just give you a vague goal and a good luck buddy and let you figure it out for yourself, allowing for the possibility of failure and the natural formation of some very unique narrative moments. Some great recent versions of this are modern friend slop games like Repo, Peak, or Headliners. In the absence of a story, our brains tend to generate their own, assisted by the goals, obstacles, and bickering friends the game provides us. Like this one time in Repo, when some of the DM crew and I narrowly escaped the huntsman, the terrifying old guy with the rifle who one-shots you if you make too much noise. We were all hiding in the starting room with the door closed, arguing about a strategy for how to collect our treasure and leave without getting caught, when suddenly the door slammed open and the huntsman was right fucking there, prompting everybody to scream and immediately get shot, losing us the game. I couldn't have written it better, and I didn't have to. I would say video games are at their peak storytelling capability when they're just expertly coded simulations that subtly push you in a narratively interesting direction, anticipate your reactions, and are prepared to respond in kind, because no other medium can do anything close to that. It's not that the other elements don't matter, but with enough interactivity, the visuals become secondary. Like novels, it starts to work with your imagination to create new experiences. You remember menus and text prompts as cinematic events because that's how it plays out in your head. Games like Stellaris, Crusader Kings, or Victoria give you mechanics for diplomatic conversations and battle tactics, but your experience is full-on political intrigue. You feel the thrill of tactical combat and the satisfaction of outwitting your enemies. You discover unexpected situations by a random roll of the dice and a developer's clever programming, and your own personalized story emerges from the experience. It's a wholly unique form of storytelling that's only possible through this medium, and it's incredible that it even exists. And if you want to try it for yourself, I have a recommendation. Victoria 3 is going to be free to play on Steam next weekend from Thursday to Monday, which is like the 30th to the 4th. It's a perfect example of exactly what I'm talking about because it's a full simulation of various countries in the 19th century, except you can manipulate it however you want, and, I don't know, take over all of America as the Kingdom of Texas. If you're a fan of Paradox and Victoria 3 and you're already planning on buying the new expansion anyway, consider using my affiliate link in the description. I get money if you use it, and that money goes back into paying for these videos, plus it'll encourage Paradox to keep sponsoring me. In short, video games are the right choice for your story if you want your audience to set their own pace, explore your world up close, and feel personally responsible for the direction of the narrative. They're the closest medium we currently have to recreating real life, and if you can master playing with people's expectations, they can be used to create some truly one-of-a-kind experiences. Choosing a medium for your story that aligns best with what you want to do isn't always a choice you get to make. It's more important to understand the strengths and limitations of the medium currently at your disposal and use it to your advantage to create the best version of the story you're telling. Writing a book is way more accessible than making a AAA video game, and it's more important to understand the strengths and limitations of the medium currently at your disposal and use it to your advantage to create the best version of the story you're telling. A truly standout example of a story that not only adapts to its medium but has done so across multiple iterations is Scott Pilgrim, which has been produced as a comic, a video game, a movie, and an animated TV series by the same creator, largely because he was willing to completely break it apart and redo anything that didn't work to make sure it best fit that version. The original comic run tells a relatively simple story of a guy who has to fight his girlfriend's evil exes in order to be with her, which works really well for episodic installments of a graphic novel series. And it takes advantage of comic book visual storytelling techniques like big sweeping action shots and simplistic character design. Even its humor relies heavily on visual gags and text labels, or just snappy little moments of dialogue that are easy to fit into a speech bubble. Edgar Wright and Brian Lee O'Malley clearly understood that to make the movie feel remotely the same, things would have to be changed. They could not feasibly fit a 7-comic narrative into an hour and 50-minute film, so scenes had to be cut, shortened, and combined. Since they were working with real actors, a lot of work had to be put into translating that heightened sense of reality you get from these little cartoon drawings. And they put so much care and attention into doing just that through the casting, the costumes, the location, and the on-screen graphics. The goal wasn't to turn the comic into live action, it was to turn the inherently grounded live action elements they chose to work with into the comic. The actors don't act like real people, they act like cartoon characters. They don't blink, they move on cue, they have perfect timing, no matter how many takes it took to achieve. But I think what made this all really work in a way that other comic to movie adaptations fail was something that is wholly unique to the medium of film, the first ever special effect, and the thing that turned movies from motion pictures into stories. The editing. You can tell this whole film was made with the final edit in mind. It's Edgar Wright's whole specialty. The way your attention is guided through this movie from one scene to another with so many creative cuts and transitions, the careful timing and sound design helping to ground you in the next scene before it even starts. It all turns what could be an overwhelming mess of visual information into a fluid carnival ride that feels as smooth as your eyes gliding over the page of a comic. I've never seen another movie come anywhere close to pulling this off, and it was only achievable by knowing exactly what the final product needed to feel like and what needed to be compensated for to match the same experience as the original. And then the story was adapted again into an animated series, which is somehow the same and completely different from the last two iterations. The strength of a multi-episode series is that you get so much more time to spend with your characters, and so the creators took the opportunity to do just that, retooling the whole story to dive deeper into each of these side characters who we've all come to love, and explore who they really are when Scott isn't the only one who has time to be in the spotlight. Each retelling of the story is also a different perspective on the narrative itself, with Scott Takes Off fully reckoning with not only the author's personal history, but also with the community who grew alongside each iteration. With all of them together, you get such a complete exploration of this concept and these characters, and none of them feel like they clash or interfere with each other. And it's specifically because the material was so well understood and prioritized that each medium strengthens the core story in its own unique way. These obviously aren't the only mediums available either. There are dozens of ways your story could be told, and we keep inventing new ones. Some of my favorites at this point come from D&D podcasts, and that wasn't even a recognizable string of syllables when I was a kid. D&D is a whole new variation to play around with. The combination of group decision-making, improv performances, working with and competing against the DM, plus randomly generated outcomes makes for narratives that simply couldn't exist in any other format, because most of the impact comes from watching the narrative form out of this cloud of chaos. And then audio productions like Dungeons and Daddies or Hello from the Magic Tavern add radio play style editing and polish on top, and it all makes the film industry feel a little less necessary, and to me that's really inspiring. As Hollywood and book publishers and giant game studios get further and further from our reach, I've wondered if anyone or anything will move to fill in that gap. And it was silly to ever doubt, because of course they did. People find ways to make art, and they learn how to utilize the tools they have available specifically during times like these when traditional paths feel inaccessible. Indie game developers are making all the games they'd hoped to see when they were younger because the big companies were never going to risk it. Filmmakers and animators are finding ways to use their relatively limited equipment and resources to make and distribute their ideas anyway. The highest performing trailer on YouTube a couple weeks ago, beating out The Hunger Games and The Avengers, was The Amazing Digital Circus, which is an independently developed animated series that specifically leans into its own limitations to create a wholly unique style and cast of characters. And it happens to be the best show I've seen in a really long time, and it's probably what I'm going to talk about for the next video. For now, let me know what your preferred medium is in the comments and what you like about it. I'm genuinely curious to hear your thoughts. I hope some of this was helpful for your own writing, or was at least kind of interesting. Be sure to try out Victoria 3 next weekend if you want, or don't, but it's free and cool, and it's an easy way to support the channel. Thank you again to Paradox for sponsoring this video. Thank you to you for watching, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks. Ta-da! Thank you for watching and subscribing and sharing and liking and commenting and doing all those YouTube things. Dormonster has a public Discord if you would like to chat with other fans or me. There's a link for it in the description. It's public, it's free. There's a separate VIP section if you're on Patreon. And I guess that's pretty much it. I don't have a lot of other stuff to plug this time. So I'm gonna start my long weekend of work. That was misleading. All right, goodbye. I have a whole video on this. You should go watch it. You can't hear what I'm saying. I'm just editing this in really fast with everything else so that it looks funny. Fuck these two motherfuckers.